February 21, 1991. A freezing morning in Merseyside. Liverpool Football Club occupies the absolute summit of English football. They are the reigning champions. They are leading the league table. Just 24 hours prior, they played out a breathless, chaotic 4-4 draw against their bitter rivals Everton in the FA Cup. It was a match that had everything. Drama, goals, pure intensity, the kind of football that makes billions of people tune into this sport. But inside the walls of Anfield, something else is happening. Something dark, something the public is completely blind to. Suddenly, a press conference is called. No warning, no build-up. The journalists pile into the room expecting standard match analysis. Instead, they see a man who looks completely hollowed out. Kenny Dalglish, the undisputed king of Merseyside. The bulletproof icon. The man who had conquered Europe as a player and dominantly conquered domestic football as a manager. He sits down, looks at the microphones, and drops a bomb that shatters English football to its very core. He is resigning, effective immediately, just gone, bye-bye. The official reason handed down by the establishment. Stress. That's the word they put on the paper. That's the neat, tidy little box they want you to look at. A revenue product wearing a lab coat telling you a man is just tired. But let's be real for a second. We are talking about Kenny Dalglish. This is a man forged in the brutal, unforgiving environments of Glasgow football. This is a man who took physical punishment from the most vicious defenders of the 1970s and 1980s and just smiled. Stress. The fanbase is left in absolute chaos. It feels like a quiet betrayal. How does the king just walk away from his throne when the empire is still winning? Here is what the big organizations didn't want you to think about. They wanted you to look at the league table. They wanted you to look at the commercial machine. But beneath the surface, the structural reality was completely different from the golden appearance. To understand why Dalglish walked out in 1991, you have to go back to April 15, 1989. The Hillsborough disaster. 97 human beings went to a football match and never came home. It was a systematic failure of policing, stadium infrastructure, and institutional accountability. And who was left to carry the emotional wreckage of an entire city? Not the politicians, not the football executives sitting in their luxury suites. It was Kenny Dalglish. In the days and weeks following that horror, Dalglish stopped being just a football manager. He became a figurehead of raw grief. He attended funeral after funeral, sometimes 4 in a single day. He visited the injured in hospitals. He listened to the agonizing stories of broken families. He absorbed the collective trauma of a massive working-class community that was being actively gaslit by the mainstream media and the government. All while the corporate executives demanded he keep winning football matches. Keep the wheel turning. Keep the money flowing. Think about the psychological toll. Every single day, you are looking into the eyes of a mother who lost her child, and then you have to walk onto a training pitch and motivate millionaire athletes to run a bit faster. It's an impossible conflict. Dalglish was running on pure emotional fumes. The bulletproof myth of King Kenny was a shield the club used to hide a massive, gaping wound. By 1991, that shield cracked. The Everton match wasn't just a draw, it was the final breaking point of a man who had nothing left to give to a system that just kept taking. The fans saw a sudden, baffling exit. They saw a squad that was still top of the league and assumed everything was fine. They believed the narrative that this was just a temporary dip in energy. But the reality was far more ominous. The club was functioning on institutional memory, not actual structural health. The core was rotting, and the man who had been holding the entire structure together on his shoulders had just stepped aside. The empire was naked, but nobody was looking at the clothes. They were too busy worshipping the crown. Gary Neville would later note that when a dominant empire loses its anchor, the collapse doesn't happen overnight, it happens piece by piece from the inside. And that is exactly what was waiting in the shadows. The establishment had successfully spun the resignation as an isolated personal issue. They protected the myth of the club's flawless operation. But the machine was broken. The recruitment was outdated, the economics of the sport was shifting rapidly, and Liverpool was standing completely still, insulated by their past glory. They needed a savior. Instead, they got a truth teller. And as we know in football, the truth is the most dangerous thing you can bring into a boardroom. Enter Graeme Souness. April 1991. If Dalglish was the benevolent king, Souness was the iron-fisted general. He returns to Anfield as the new manager, arriving from a wildly successful, revolutionizing spell at Rangers. On paper, Souness is inheriting a goldmine. The squad list looks formidable. John Barnes, Ian Rush, Peter Beardsley, Bruce Grobbelaar. Names that strike fear into any opponent. The casual fans look at this roster and expect the dynasty to continue without a single hitch. They expect Souness to just turn the key and let the Ferrari run. But Souness walks into the dressing room, opens the hood, and realizes the engine is completely shot. Let's look at the hard numbers. The core of this legendary squad is old. Really old. Alan Hansen is retiring. Steve Nicol, Barry Venison, Ray Horton, all pushing past their physical peaks. The recruitment infrastructure at Anfield isn't just old-fashioned, it's practically prehistoric. While European clubs are building data networks and scouting global markets, Liverpool is still relying on the boot room mythology. A group of old guys sitting around drinking tea, talking about how they did things in 1975. It was a closed loop. A system entirely uncalibrated for the fast-moving economics of the upcoming Premier League era. Souness sees this immediately. He realizes that if he doesn't ruthlessly dismantle this squad and rebuild it from scratch, the club is going to fall off a cliff. So he goes to work. He tries to change the diet. He tries to change the training methods. He tries to phase out the aging icons who are more interested in a post-match pint than modern athletic recovery. He treats the club like a business that needs emergency surgery, not a holy temple that cannot be touched. And this is where the friction hits maximum velocity. When Souness tries to vocalize these structural failures, the fanbase completely revolts. The media attacks him. Why? Because his warnings shatter a sacred narrative. To admit Souness is right means admitting that Dalglish's final years weren't a flawless golden age. It means admitting that the club's leadership had failed to modernize. People don't want the truth. They want the comfort of the myth. They look at Souness's changing lineups, they look at the dropping points on the pitch, and they reach an easy, convenient verdict. Souness is the problem. Souness is ruining Kenny's team. Let me be fair for a second. Souness did himself no favors. His man management style was a sledgehammer when he needed a scalpel. He alienated senior players overnight. He sold off assets like Peter Beardsley way too quickly. And his catastrophic, unforgivable decision to sell an exclusive interview to the Sun newspaper, the most hated publication in Liverpool after their vile coverage of Hillsborough, completely destroyed his personal credibility with the community. It was a massive, self-inflicted wound. But separate the man's mistakes from his diagnosis. Souness's warnings about the systemic rot were 100% accurate. The club was broke. The boardroom was filled with conservative directors who refused to invest in the stadium or global commercial branding. Manchester United was building a commercial monster under Alex Ferguson, preparing to hijack the global market. Arsenal was modernizing under George Graham. Liverpool was standing on the beach, watching the tidal wave come in, convinced their historic trophies would somehow act as a seawall. Ian Wright once talked about playing Liverpool during this specific transition period. He said you could feel the fear factor evaporating. The shirts were still red, the stadium still sang, "You'll never walk alone," but the actual substance behind it was gone. The intensity was missing, the physical dominance was gone. Souness was presiding over a period of heavy on-field decline, which made him the perfect scapegoat. Every time he said, "We are miles behind the scenes," the establishment dismissed it as self-serving deflection. They called it excuse-making. They called it sacrilege against the golden era. It's the classic follow the money play. The club's executives wanted to hide the fact that they hadn't reinvested the millions generated from a decade of European dominance back into the club's infrastructure. They wanted the fans to blame the tactical choices of the manager rather than the systemic failures of the board. Souness was screaming into a hurricane. He was a legacy player telling a brutally honest truth long before the world was ready to listen. He saw the cliff edge. He pointed at it, and for his trouble, he was labeled the villain who drove the car off the road. Fast forward 15 years. January 2011, the football world has completely changed. The English Premier League is now a multi-billion-dollar global entertainment product. And Liverpool, they are living out the exact nightmare Graeme Souness predicted decades ago. They haven't won a league title since 1990. The club has just escaped a near-fatal financial bankruptcy under the disastrous ownership of American tycoons Tom Hicks and George Gillett, a classic case of predatory sports capitalism that almost killed an institution. The new owners, Fenway Sports Group, need an immediate shield. They need a massive PR win to calm an incredibly angry, toxic fanbase. Roy Hodgson's brief, miserable tenure as manager has just ended, leaving the team hovering dangerously close to the relegation zone. The atmosphere is poisonous. So what does the new corporate ownership group do? They pull the ultimate emergency lever. They bring back the icon. Kenny Dalglish returns. The announcement triggers absolute euphoria across Merseyside. It's like a religious restoration. The king is back to reclaim his throne. The fans are ecstatic. The media sells the ultimate fairy tale narrative. The trauma of 1991 is erased. The structural failures of the present are ignored. The crowd believes that through sheer force of personality and historical aura, Dalglish can magically fix a modern, highly complex football club. And initially, the fairy tale works. Dalglish stabilizes the ship. He brings in players like Luis Suarez. He wins the League Cup in 2012, reaching the FA Cup final as well. The stadium is rocking, the flags are waving, and the casual observers are convinced that the myth has finally triumphed over modern reality. The establishment sits back and smiles. The revenue product is safe. The crowd is properly pacified by the nostalgia machine. But modern football doesn't care about fairy tales. It doesn't care about aura. Beneath the immediate cup success, the exact modern adaptation limitations that Souness had warned about decades prior begin to bleed through. The game in 2011 is no longer about gut instinct and local scout networks. It's about hyper-advanced data analysis, global sports science, and corporate communication strategy. And in these areas, Dalglish's second tenure begins to experience a massive, systematic breakdown. Look at the recruitment under this second spell. The club spends massive, astronomical fees on players like Andy Carroll, Stuart Downing, and Charlie Adam. British players bought at vastly inflated premiums because they fit an old-school model of domestic physicality. It was an absolute disaster of squad building. The underlying data screamed that these players couldn't function at elite level, but the old-school recruitment philosophy overrode the metrics. Millions of pounds were flushed down the toilet, leaving the club structurally crippled while rivals like Manchester City and Chelsea built elite, data-driven football machines. But the ultimate structural failure wasn't just happening on the transfer market. It happened in the media room. Late 2011, the Luis Suarez and Patrice Evra racism controversy erupts. A highly sensitive, explosive situation that required modern crisis management, legal precision, and a deep understanding of the global cultural landscape. Instead, Dalglish and the Liverpool old guard handle it like it's a 1980s dressing room dispute. They close ranks. They launch a defensive, tribal assault against the accusations. The club goes so far as to have the entire squad wear warm-up t-shirts displaying Suarez's face before a match at Wigan, a public relations disaster that horrified global sponsors and completely alienated neutral viewers. Dalglish wasn't acting out of malice, he was acting out of an outdated playbook. In his mind, he was protecting his player, just like he protected his community in 1989. But the world had moved on. The corporate and cultural stakes were massive. A global sporting institution could not behave like a local fortress. The media onslaught was devastating. Jurgen Klopp would later state in a general discussion on club culture that modern managers must understand they operate under a global microscope where every corporate action carries massive societal weight. Dalglish badly misread that landscape. The league form collapsed. Liverpool finished the 2011-2012 season in 8th place, their lowest Premier League finish in 2 decades. The cup runs were a shiny band-aid covering a massive internal hemorrhaging. In May 2012, Fenway Sports Group flew Dalglish to Boston. No sentiment, no reverence for the king. Just cold, hard corporate calculation. He was dismissed. Just gone. Bye-bye. The nostalgia shield had outlived its tactical usefulness for the billionaires, and just like that, the icon was cast aside. So what is the real thesis here? What is the story the football establishment doesn't want you to connect? It's the direct line running from February 1991 to May 2012. It's the quiet, definitive vindication of Graeme Souness. For over 20 years, the narrative in English football was simple. Kenny Dalglish left Liverpool at the absolute peak, and Graeme Souness walked in and single-handedly destroyed the club through arrogance and incompetence. It's a neat, digestible story. It has a flawless hero and a perfect villain. It keeps the fans happy because it means that Liverpool way was never broken. It was just one man who messed it up. But history is a ledger that eventually balances itself out. When you look at Dalglish's second tenure in 2011, you see the exact same structural walls being hit. You see what happens when a club relies on historical exceptionalism rather than modern, aggressive structural evolution. Souness wasn't a villain who broke a healthy machine, he was the man tasked with fixing a machine that was already structurally dead. His crime wasn't that he failed, his crime was that he told the truth about why the club was failing while the stadium was still singing his predecessor's name. Look at how Liverpool finally climbed back to the top years later under Jurgen Klopp. Did they do it by relying on the old, boot room, mythology? Did they do it by signing players based on gut feeling and old-school grit? Absolutely not. They did it by building the most advanced, data-driven analytics department in the world under Michael Edwards. They did it by tracking every single metric, revolutionizing their sports science, modernizing their corporate communication, and treating the club like a forward-thinking global enterprise. They did, essentially, exactly what Graeme Souness was screaming for them to do in 1992. They just did it with better funding and a modern corporate structure behind them. This isn't about tearing down Kenny Dalglish's ultimate legacy. The man is an untouchable icon for a reason. His emotional sacrifice for the city of Liverpool after Hillsborough is one of the most profoundly human chapters in the history of global sport. He carried a burden that would have broken almost any other human being on this planet. He deserves his statue outside Anfield. He deserves his grandstand named after him. But football at this scale is a brutal, cold business. When we separate the emotional mythology from the structural reality, we have to admit that Souness was right. The warning signs he pointed to, the aging squad, the outdated scouting, the refusal of the boardroom to adapt to the new economic realities of the sport, were completely real. He was the classic anti-establishment figure within the football system, the guy who refused to bow to the sacred narrative and paid the ultimate price for his honesty. The establishment buried Souness because his truth was bad for business. It was bad for the brand. They needed the fans to keep buying tickets, keep buying merchandise, and keep believing that the glory days were just around the corner if everyone just stayed loyal to the old ways. Souness blew the whistle on that entire illusion. He pulled back the curtain on the corporate laziness that followed a decade of winning, and the system chewed him up and spit him out for it. So look at the landscape today. Look at how modern clubs are run. Look at how the multi-billion-dollar machine of the 2026 World Cup era operates. It is a world entirely run by metrics, structural systems, and cold corporate efficiency. The era of the bulletproof icon managing by pure aura is completely dead and buried. Souness saw that death coming 30 years ago. He tried to warn us. But nobody wanted to believe him because the lie they were living was just too beautiful. What's your verdict on this? Was Graeme Souness a genuine truth-teller who got hung out to dry by a lazy, nostalgic establishment? Or was he just a bad manager who used structural problems as an excuse for his own tactical failures at Anfield? Who is the real villain of this story, the board, the manager, or the mythology itself? Drop your take or verdict in the comments below. I read every single one. A like genuinely helps the channel more than you'd think. And subscribe if you want more uncompromising, follow the money investigative football coverage just like this. Football at this scale is never just a tournament. It's a moment in time. I'll see you in the next one.